been here for 35 years, 20-something years as a partner. I started here when we were a studio of 23 people, small but also working internationally. And today we're more than 600 people, so that's a big change. My name is Louis Becker. I'm the design principal of Henning Larsen Architects, Copenhagen, and this is the Architects series. So the practice started in '59. It was Professor Henning Larsen who started the practice. But in '79, the studio did the competition for the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Saudi Arabia and won that competition, and that became the big breaking point for what's happening here. And I started in '89, and at that time the studio just completed and finished the Saudi Arabian project, but also a number of other projects internationally. So it was really, at the time, maybe the only really international studio besides Jørn Utzon here. Already before Henning Larsen passed away and he was active in the studio, we started a journey of moving into sustainability more deliberately and also in depth. We started with energy consumption in buildings, which is a big topic in Denmark because the cost of it is very high because it's much colder here than in the south. And that journey had already started. Henning Larsen, you could say, was doing a transition of the studio to a group of partners over some years before. So when he passed away, it was not like we lost our father per se, but he was a very important person. But at the time, we had the keys to the car, so to speak. His vision of what an architectural studio should be, what this is about, what the whole profession is about, is still very strong and very much alive. We never, ever repeated ourselves. We had clients calling us, said, I would like a building like the one we have seen. And we said, sorry, we don't do that. We never do two buildings alike. So the curiosity and the openness and the invitation to younger generations to come in and be part of, let's say, coloring or like looking at the future is something that's been everlasting in our legacy. Hopefully this is still happening here. I think it is. If you look at our staff and the good architects and colleagues, the average age is something in around 30. So we have quite a young, big group of people doing it. And I think for us, it's part of being curious is also that you are young and want to learn and stuff like that. But of course, in combination with more experienced people. In Henning Larsen, the context, the place, is the whole driver of what we do. In a technical perspective, in a climate perspective, in a people perspective, and society perspective. That's the foundation. So we use a lot of time in each project to do deep dive survey of what we're trying to work with. The learnings from Bolzano and the inspiration of Bolzano was very much to understand this doubleness between the Italian part and the German part, the industrial part, the old part of Bolzano.
The Quartiere Ponte Roma project is located in Bolzano, so surrounded by beautiful Italian Alps in a beautiful city.
When we came first to the area, it's always when you're coming to those former industrial sites, you just fell in love in the scale of that and the kind of monumentality. When you start to kind of dive in and you read about the history, then you also feel that those buildings are there. Of course, you want to keep them from many reasons. The first one is like the memory and the kind of nostalgia. It's also the CO2 footprint. And also the third one because of purely architectural aesthetics that we like those structures.
What we really tried to do was to not completely erase this authenticity of the site where you see industries and machine and it's a little bit dirty, but rather maintaining it as much as we could and really embody it in the design. But at the same time bring some of the DNA of the Bolzano city center that people love so much.
And because the structures are already there, so they're easy to activate, and the state of the two ones that we kept was really good. We put them kind of in the focus and the central pivotal point of the whole master plan, relating with the public space as well and using them as a public space.
The first thing that we did when we looked at the site and we saw that there were 7 existing industries was to really look at them and have a sort of nerdy scanning, you could say, and understand what could be actually valuable in these halls and what could be maintained. So 2 of the halls, we found in them a lot of charm and poetry, and they are the most ancient of the site, and they are quite special because they are exactly identical and they are almost kissing each other, so we were calling them kissing halls for the whole design project. But also what to do with the other 5 halls that we cannot maintain, and this was in a more smaller scale, so we looked at their architectural elements and tried to figure out how we could reuse them in other ways. For example, some steel beams, they were used in the roofs of some of our buildings and create some greenhouses.
This is our houses in this neighborhood. And the reason why we were more, let's say, more rough here was that the whole thing is more rough. So you don't have to blend in. There's another part of Copenhagen to the north, which is everything is like somehow connected. It's beautiful. But here it's about not being beautiful in the traditional sense. This is our house. See, all the buildings in this neighborhood kind of shift in height. It's not like a homogeneous height. This is always up and down. So that was also why we got the permission to do the tower-like structure in the middle, and then this one is following the neighbor building in a way. This is just the fun part. I have my workshop here. In a city, it's super luxury to have a place like this as your thing, and also if you want to do models and stuff like that, we sit and do them here. So please, this is the living room, which is with the double height space. As an architect, you always work at home. And we were getting crazy because every time you have people visiting you, you have to take everything away. So we created a working platform up here. So that's where we have our desks, where we draw and work on things. And then this is more the living area of it.
When we started to work on the Prague Central Station, I think that was also kind of an interesting way that you have this hub that is connecting just not just a train, that's a train station, but it's a true gateway to the city. You have buses, trams, self-mobility, cars where all people are arriving. So the whole concept and was circulating how to kind of make an ease and kind of understandable interwoven of all those ways of mobility.
We planned for a positive impact on the everyday life on people by developing 3 strategies. We have been focusing on safety, mobility and heritage according to that site. We have been looking into making this a safe place for people to go during the day and during night. Of course, our landscape team worked in the park, creating actually visibility and sight lines throughout the park, and we also integrated a light concept. When it came to working with heritage, we really had a big emphasis on trying to keep as much as we could of the existing park and terminal hall, but still, of course, transforming it into a future-oriented mobility hub where we know there comes a fast train, there comes a new metro, and there comes a new tram line. We also work with a new layer, you could say, on this. Like there comes a new canopy which is reaching out into the park, and that was inspired by the treetops of the park itself to make a holistic proposal.
And then the way we're working in the office is also kind of, to understand not just like the urban scale or just like architectural or just the landscape, but we try to also kind of work across those kind of three subjects. And I think this project is kind of an interesting example when all those three things are coming together and they're informing. So the landscape is informed by the design of the train station and vice versa. And like how we think about urban fabric is also kind of like even larger. Okay, how you enter into the city, what is your experience arriving, and what the message also you want to give to people coming to the town and when they're coming out of the town.
For the last years, we've been obsessed with the carbon footprint of each material, which is the big thing. But also that we are using genuine materials. So when we use wood, we try to use it as wood, not as something else, and not the wood made in plastic or not wood that are painted, trying to do that. Personally, I'm so obsessed with this thing that there's a longevity in quality. If you really do quality, it lasts for many, many, many years. Trying to look at the carbon first. How can we bring it down? Where can we get it to? And if you look at some of the things we have in the studio now with the walls of hay, that was a small test project we did in Jutland, 200 kilometers from Copenhagen. 250 square meters, very small, not a significant project. That project have now generated that we're using it in an enormous project in Holland, which is more than 100,000 square meters of transport hub, logistics center basically, building the walls in straw. And that is to really bring down the carbon footprint.
So concerning the CERN building, we kind of are following up of our obsession to do wooden buildings. And we were very lucky to be invited to an international competition. There were actually 20 competitors, which is a lot actually. Of course, you need to find the right concept. In CERN, everything is about circles, and it's also evident that you can do a concept which is circular, of course. And we did, and we won. And what's interesting about the building is, of course, that it is just taking a step even more towards the perfect wooden structure and the perfect low carbon structure, because it's a big game to find the right balance between materials and structure.
It's a building where we have gone all the way with a full wood building with everything in wood, all slabs and columns and facades, everything is wood. That was a strong focus when we did it, but also inspired by the wood cabins in Switzerland, in the mountains. So it was not like something far off, or we didn't look at some Nordics, it was really a Swiss character.
So it's basically kind of like a donut with a lot of small office spaces. There's a lot of researchers that they need their little space, all of them. 3 floors of office and a lower floor with a restaurant and some kind of labs also. In CERN also, of course, we were extremely fascinated by Geneva, about the Alps, about the lake. It's beautiful down there. So the biophilic approach, taking in, making nature part of the building, having kind of a complementary thinking about building, culture and nature. That's kind of the basis of CERN. So the building is part of the site, it's part of the nature, it's part of the mountains, and it's also a passage that you go through into the courtyard, which is protected, which is full of trees, which has rocks from the Alps into the courtyard. So it's very much about kind of metamorphosis between nature and building.
We've done all the buildings here, all these, the red brick ones. It's something I worked on for a long time. This is the green facade. And this one is how could we cover as much as possible of this facade for the residential living here and then have something nice to look at. Everything you see from your bedroom and stuff like that, this is the green wall. And we got subsidized from the government because this is first time it's self-watering system. So there's no artificial water. Not like our balconies where we water every day. This is not like that.
Volvo was an incredible experience for us. We were kind of trying to search for the very special thing about Sweden, about Volvo.
When we did the competition, we had a long discussion about what is a Volvo and what is a Fiat, what is a Ferrari. Volvo is about two things, only two things. It's about safety and it's about access to nature. That's the two things that Volvo does.
So we kind of saw the possibility of speaking up the brand into kind of a human-centric way of thinking, securing human beings and taking care. For this building, there would be kind of 4 keywords. There would be the icon, there would be the meeting place, there would be the premium experience, which comes from, of course, the car experience, and then the most sustainable building or expression.
So when we looked at it, we said, okay, how can we somehow represent this in a building? And in a way, the wood structure we ended up with and also the round shape was about this idea of you're out in nature, you're looking up these big trees and you are protected from the crown of the tree. The safety is about that. So the wood came from this inspiration.
It was important that this was a meeting place for the city. There we kind of had this idea of re-establishing a piece of nature inside the city. We need to accommodate a lot of parkings, 800 I think. We took a little piece from Sweden, we put it on top of the parking, so in this kind of urban area we have a kind of a big hill. So that means that you have the kind of slanted landscape, it's kind of a terraced landscape, a cascade on which different things happens. In that kind of podium, you could call it, you've got all kind of secondary functions. There's also the vehicle handover, there's a kind of event hall. Everything is kind of in the mountains, as we call it. And over that, or on that, you have the forest. And the forest consists of the three trunks, bigger trunks in wood. And from the three trunks, a wooden structure is kind of weaved into this kind of bigger canopy in a kind of big parametric game, which of course is extremely complicated. If we didn't have the facilities with the computer and the computerized design and also computerized manufacturing, it would be nearly impossible, right, to do. So a lot of different pieces, needs to be produced, needs to be numbered, needs to be assembled. And that was like an amazing thing to see it assembled, because also this happened really, really fast.
For Copenhagen, it's the whole thing about, and unfortunately there's not enough international architects here, but the international kind of atmosphere and this building up is that there was a strong economic growth here, and then the city also changed from just, let's say, being the place you went to work and then went to the suburbs to really live here. And then this plan of this area was made by Kobe. If you come a weekend day, you will have 2,000 or 3,000 people swimming. People are moving from that area to here because it's unbearable to live there because of so many people. And that's why there's no beach here. There was this strong wish to bring people to the water, which was again a political thing. 20 years ago, if you were swimming in the harbor, it was the direct way to the hospital because it was so polluted. But there was a decision taken politically saying we will be able to swim in our harbor, and it took 7 years to clean it. And after that, you've been able to swim. And this is our most popular asset in Denmark at the moment. The Bioto project was a competition in France, in Lille, which is the northwest, super windy place. And our idea with the project was to do a building that was much more inclusive and also brought in nature. And also a nature that was more quiet, not windy, wind-shaded. Our idea was to say, in this building you can work indoor but also outdoor.
The main concept about the building is to kind of work with the biophilic aspect in a very direct way. And I mean, in Italy in Milano you got the Bosco Verticale, and this is a little inspired by to secure like a cascading rooftop landscape with trees. And also having like kind of cut out courtyards with terraces, with lushness and green, and securing the best possible workspace for people in the building, being close to a terrace, being close to the green, and being really part of nature.
We have 266 trees on the building. We have 180 trees on the roof. We have put off this extra facades to be shaded for the wind. And we have a lot of biodiversity in it, a lot of bees and birds and things that normally would not have a chance in this environment.
The overall geometry of the Bioto is breaking the linearity, the traditional linearity of the office building. The Bioto is part of the Eurolille, where a lot of new buildings was built in the 90s. We needed to break down the traditional way of making workspace. The side is kind of a rectangle. We do cut into this kind of block and have kind of like a zigzag, also kind of you could say also a yin-yang. The idea that you kind of meander the green and the building together. So I think that's what we do in many of our projects. We're trying to work with the transition between nature and building, and make it softer and make it more gentle and make it more qualitative for the people inside of the building.
The Sydney project was a special one because the program was a big high-rise building for office use, and at the same time there was this almost non-place with a Parliament Bridge going across, which is the oldest wooden bridge in Sydney, and Darling Harbour. Our scheme was, and we did the sketch in the airplane on the way back. The sketch was to say we'll do a very efficient machine for the tower, but we'll do that quite fast. And all the time we will spend on finding out how to connect to Sydney, to connect to the scale of the old harbour. The CBD, which is the business district, the centre of Sydney, is very mineral in its character. There's hardly any green. So could we introduce a park? Could we have places where you meet?
I think this project in Sydney is a kind of example, also the way we try to push our projects. So when you start to work in this big scale destinations, that you're always thinking, okay, how to bring that human scale. And again, coming back to Scandinavia, that's when when we, if you read young girl books, that okay, we have to focus on the human scale and well-being and how we kind of behaving in those areas. And you have something contradictory. Okay, how to bring that kind of scale and feelingness of coziness or belonging to the place in the clash of big towers or big structures. I don't know if you go to New York, you kind of maybe missing that in between scale.
So basically we sketched everything that was at city level, which is up to 5 4 or 5 floors. And that became these terraces and different streets and different levels and restaurants and stuff like that. So we wanted to connect this after work life that happens in Darling Harbour with the transition into the CBD across a big park with a permanent bridge as part of it. And then have, on top of that, have this big high-rise with the efficient floors.
I think that our kind of most obvious ambition was that every building and every plan, because it was a master plan here, is that we are really reinforcing the public realm, that all buildings have an obligation to participate and be part of it. You cannot do a private thing. That's why also the bank buildings have shops or restaurants in the bottom, and it opens up basically, because otherwise we get this Copenhagen we had 20 years ago. And I think it's not super unique for us. It's something that's been adopted to, let's say, also the planning. But this is super important. That's the first thing we test. If it really makes, let's say, makes a place. Are we doing enough to make this active, this place here? I'm not a big fan of the perfection. I think the imperfect is kind of really where things are happening, where the cracks, where people can do something different. So I think that, bring people out on the outside of the buildings and be part of the life, even though you're sitting on your balcony, is important.
Example, have one element.
Say the strategy and say, okay, we have this room.
But I think you're right in that sense. There's something about, especially if these guys.
And just see how much excavation would be required.
How I see the future of architecture. I think we will see a much more technology-driven, possibilities that comes out of digital tools or comes out of manufacturing tools and stuff like that will change our perception of doing it. Like I'm pointing at our 3D printed buildings we're seeing behind, things we could not do before. Can create shapes that are almost impossible to do by hand. Things like that will be much bigger in the future. I think that's for sure. But I think if a broader audience should understand it, we need to be able to tie it into history and legacy in a way. It's not a spaceship we are creating. We're creating something that comes out of a 1,000-year story of humanity. And we are just adding few things on that, but we never forget our anchor in where it comes from. And that's why I think it's so important when you go to a place, you really try to understand it. And if you do that right, that'll be fueling your design process to look into the future.